Welcome to Curasolic, the show where we question the past and imagine the future. Today, we spoke with Timothy Fulton, who is a man who suffers from a really rare disease called adult onset Still's disease, which is a rare idiopathic disease that affects 1 in 100,000 to 1 in a million people. It is a systemic disease, meaning it affects multiple parts of the body and has multiple symptoms, such as high fevers, rashes all over the body, and joint pains. His mission is to inspire people to overcome their diseases. For himself, for example, he was able to run 100 kilometers, which is 62 miles, in only 200 days to raise awareness for rare diseases. He is also the founder of his personal project called Running Rare, which aims to put a spotlight on all sorts of rare diseases and just inspire people to talk about it more and find better ways to cope with it. So our goal with this episode is to do our part in raising awareness for rare diseases and help people.
So I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to leave a comment on YouTube and subscribe on all your favorite streaming platforms. It really helps us to grow the show and, more importantly, to provide better content for you guys. Also, if you have your own personal story or you're an expert in a particular field and you'd like to appear on our show, make sure to send us an email at curasaholic@gmail.com. So, without further ado, here is Timothy Fulton.
Tim, you have a quote on your Running Rare website that says, "I'm running to make the invisible visible." Why that quote?
I think that I was diagnosed with a rare disease at the age of 22. So I've been living with this chronic rare disease called adult onset Still's disease, which is an inflammatory disorder that affects the whole body pretty much. And that quote for me was that I came to the realization that a lot of people living with chronic diseases, and in particular what we call invisible diseases, which is where you might look at someone on the street and not know what might be going on sort of internally for them, and you can kind of walk by and not think anything of it, even though that person might be in tremendous suffering or pain or all of these sort of things happening in their lives. And so this concept of trying to make the invisible, so invisible illnesses, visible, was a really powerful, motivator for me, because often, people living with a rare or invisible disease gets overlooked, whether it's in legislation or just in day-to-day life. And so that was my mission, sort of starting Running Rare, was to try and do something about that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's such a simple quote, but powerful at the same time. I like it. Yeah,
it was powerful. Well, we saw it. That's why we were, intrigued to ask you about that.
Yeah.
So, when you were growing up, what did you expect your life to look like? What were some of your ambitions, some of your goals?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question, and I think actually a lot of it goes back to maybe quite early in my childhood. When I first started school, I really struggled, and I very quickly fell behind my peers, sort of in reading and writing in particular. And for me, that had a really big impact, because a lot of my early school experience was quite negative, and a lot of the messaging that I received was that I wasn't going anywhere, I had no hope, I'd never figure out how to sort of get these things to come together. And my parents sort of went to a number of specialists, and we went and sought out lots of information to sort of try and gain a bit of an understanding of why I was really struggling and falling so far behind. And eventually they came across a specialized reading program in Seattle, and I went there and did an intensive course for 3 or 4 months. And prior to that course, we have home readers here in Australia that are kind of little books that you bring home from school to do with practice reading with your parents. And I was like on the lowest level, and it would be the exact same word on every single page. And we would spend 5-10 minutes trying to sound out like a word like look, we'd eventually get it, we'd turn the page, it'd be the exact same word again, and I'd have no idea what it was. And after going to that sort of specialized program and getting that intervention, I sort of was able to unlock, I guess, my ability to read and write, and really quickly caught up. And then eventually, with, I guess, access to knowledge, I fell in love with it, and it didn't matter what the subject was. I wanted to learn as much as I could about it and do really well. And so I went from sort of in my early primary school years really struggling to doing really well and topping subjects and sort of being more known for my academic excellence than a lot of other things sort of at school. And I had this sort of 5-year game plan sort of coming out of college, and wanted to get a degree and try and get a foot in the door in an industry. And but I had no idea what I wanted to do. I just knew these are some of the things I want to achieve, but I didn't know the direction that I wanted to necessarily go. And it was getting pretty close to when I would have to submit for my preferences at uni. And I was sort of talking to mum. I was like, I have no idea what I want to do. And she was like, oh, why don't you try like graphic design? You sort of tend to be quite interested in kind of that visual side of things. And I had no idea that graphic design was even an option or a career, or that people did that. And because I didn't really know what I wanted to do, I was like, all right, I'll go try it out for a semester and see what this is all about, and absolutely fell in love with it. I think for me, design sort of brought together psychology, science, communication, and kind of fashion and culture as well into this sort of just this thing that I absolutely loved. And I kind of hadn't realized that I'd kind of been dabbling in design and graphic design throughout sort of my school. Like I'd spend a heap of time like on the cover of my assignments or creating graphics for my assignment, but never really knew that was something that you could do as a profession. And so by the time I had sort of got to uni, I'd had some familiarity, I guess, with some design concepts and design thinking, and just fell absolutely in love with it. And growing up, I think probably from some of those earlier experiences of really struggling with my schooling and with my learning, I wanted to do really well at whatever it was that I applied myself to. And I think that experience as well taught me that if you want to go anywhere, if you put in the repetitions and the time, you'll get better. And to learn to enjoy hard work, because things hadn't come easy to me sort of when I was younger. And so when I began to build up some experience and skills, I also had that desire to work hard as well. And that was, I'd set myself a pretty audacious goal sort of during uni that I wanted to get a perfect GPA. And I was 1 unit from achieving that goal when I started to feel a bit unwell. I was feeling really sore. I had this sort of sore throat that I'd wake up to in the morning, and then it would go away in the evening, and I'd get a bit hot in the afternoons. And I'd sort of dismissed those symptoms for probably a couple of months. And then within the space of 2 weeks, I went from kind of these mild symptoms to literally lying on my back in a hospital bed, unable to move because of the pain that I was in. And my throat felt like it was on fire, and my skin had a rash sort of all across my arms and my face and torso. And so this sort of game plan that I began to nut out and thought the journey I thought I was on very, very quickly changed.
So before we get into, your experience with stills, I just want to go back to your, you talked about some of your learning disabilities and your
Mm.
difficulties learning. What do you think was the turning point for you? Was it when you went to that, course in Seattle?
Yeah, so I think that was a huge game changer for me because it provided another method of teaching language, and teaching how to understand, yeah, written language. And so I think for me, a lot of the challenges that I probably had at school was that I was frustrated. Like, I just didn't have the mechanism to be able to express myself. Um, and so when we began to sort of unlock that ability to read and write, that frustration also dissipated with it because all of a sudden I was able to express what was going on, sort of in my mind. And so I think that was a big turning point, for me because it gave me the tools I needed to learn and to express myself.
Well, I think you're doing a really good job expressing yourself now. So kudos to you.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
you overcame that.
Yeah, you overcame that, it seems. So it's good. Uh, is there, any other particular moment or time, looking back at your childhood or all those memories that you hold on to as something good that, when you were going through Still's disease and, your fight with that you hold on to that moment and you go back just to get some kind of happiness or, peace?
Yeah, there are a few experiences that I think I'm tremendously grateful that I had growing up before I was diagnosed. One of those was that, growing up, both my brother and I were really heavily involved in team sports, and to a pretty high level. And I think what that taught me was that often our bodies can sometimes deceive us in the signals that they give us. So when you're training, you learn how to manage pain. You learn how to manage the sensations of what's happening in your body, and then be able to recognize, all right, is this something that I can push through? Is this something I need to listen to? And so you become attuned to the messages of your body. I think and so I think that had a big role to play because when I first got sick, that was something that I kind of did was to break down the problem. And that's something that I think both sort of academia, but also sport teaches us to do. All right, I've got a problem. What are the steps that I need to learn? And also, I think in sport and personal development, we also become maybe a little bit more comfortable with the goal being further away than we might like. And when a goal is further away than we might like, we need to begin to figure out what's in my control, what's outside of my control, and then take control. Yeah, take responsibility for the things in your control, and then learn how to be able to adapt to circumstances that may change. But I think when you know that you've done the preparation, then those situations that come up that are maybe not expected, you've put the work in, and that can be a sort of a comfort. And so I think that's I think how I approach stills in some ways was, all right, if this is a game of sport, how would I approach it? I think the other thing that we also touched on earlier was those, I guess, struggles of, when I was younger with my learning, and knowing that I wasn't going to get an immediate, remedy to the problem. It was going to be something that I was going to have to study. I was going to have to build my understanding of, know what I was dealing with, and then begin to see what I could do about it, and to know how to be uncomfortable. I think that was a big thing. Is that when you have a chronic disease, you spend most of your day in discomfort, and so you've got to figure out how do you manage that, and how do you handle that on a day-to-day basis.
I like what you said about the sports because for myself, I also suffer from Crohn's disease.
Mm.
and well, if you're not too familiar with it, it's a intestinal, like inflammatory intestinal condition. And I'm also like a competitive power lifter, so it's like I really see how you could, you know, use sports as almost like a remedy to your, you know, your disease. And I often do the same thing, right? I treat my condition as if I was training for my sport, and I try to keep all the variables in check, and I try to, you know, do the best I can, you know, make sure I sleep well, make sure I'm eating right, exercising as much as I can, you know, to help my condition as well as getting strong for the sport too.
Yeah, and isn't there something powerful in that, Evan, about like, so often I think there can be this easy pattern of thinking to fall into when you have a condition that's chronic, to go, oh, I'll just give up. But like you've said, you're taking into consideration your sleep, you're looking at your nutrition, you're looking probably at the load that you're putting on your body as well in the week, and you're going, these things might not necessarily cure me, but I'm going to be better off for doing them. And I might be going from a 10% to a 20%, which in a lot of people's books is not that great, but it's 10% better than if I wasn't doing those things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 No, I think what you said about your sports is it taught you a great mindset to have towards just life in general and towards your chronic illness. So I think that's great. And yeah, it just shows that, you know, doing hard things and challenges such as sports or different exercises can teach us good lessons in life.
And just being like proactive with it, right? And
exactly,
just like not just sitting around to be like, oh, I'll just accept this condition I have and let it win, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you like when you're chasing a sport and you're trying to be competitive, or even if you're not trying to be competitive, you're just, you know, trying to get better at it, well, you're constantly chasing those goals. It's the same thing with your fight with your illness, right? You're constantly chasing that until you push it away and you get better.
You overcome the challenge that you have in front.
Yeah.
So talking about your disease, so it's Still's disease, right? Can you explain, you know, what it is exactly, what it entails, since it's such a rare disease, and I think a lot of people don't know what it is.
Yeah, of course. I think I'm definitely still on a learning journey of what Stills is, but we'll sort of start at the baseline and work up. So Still's disease affects approximately 1 in 100,000 to 1 in a million people. So it's considered an ultra rare condition. At the moment, they don't fully understand what causes the inflammatory response. But you can kind of think of it in some ways as your body has kind of two immune systems in some ways. The innate immune system, which is a bit more generalized, and then you have your adaptive immune system, which is where your body is threatened by something, so maybe it's a bacteria or a virus, and then it will produce an immune response that is specific to what's attacking it. And so that's why if you get a particular strand of flu, your body will respond to that, and then you might not ever have that. You might not ever have an issue with that strand again. But if there's a new strand, then the body has to learn. And so you have autoimmunity, which are conditions that the body kind of creates an incorrect response to. It might be a particular protein or a cell that is actually your own body, but your body's not recognizing it properly. And then you have innate immune disorders, which is where the generalized immune system, something goes wrong and it starts triggering off these immune responses. And still sort of is kind of between the two. Older literature sort of says, yep, it's an autoimmune disease, something like lupus or Crohn's or rheumatoid arthritis. And then some of the newer literature is going, maybe actually it's an issue with the innate immune system. And what it causes is this cascading immune response, which results in your muscles getting attacked, your organs getting attacked, your joints getting attacked. You get rashes, these fevers, which typically seem to align with the circadian rhythm in that they'll come up at a very particular time and then they'll resolve themselves at a particular time. And it's like almost to the minute. So when I was in hospital, mine was around 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It would come up for a few hours, then it would resolve, and then it would come up again later in early morning. And then by the time the doctor came around, it was completely gone. So the rash and the fevers was completely gone. And like, oh, you must be on the mend. And then you get to that time slot again that day, and everything ramps up. And I think that has to do with sort of changes in hormonal balances, in particular, maybe something like cortisol, which has a natural ebb and flow during the day. And so stills is sort of a really difficult condition to diagnose because you have to rule everything else out before you can make the diagnosis. So, for example, a condition like rheumatoid arthritis, you can test the blood for rheumatoid factor. And if that's present, you can go, yep, this is probably going to be rheumatoid arthritis. And usually there's biomarkers, I think, around those adaptive immune diseases, but not so much with the innate disorders. And so it's, an ever-evolving sort of field of research. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of people researching it, but there is sort of some new evidence coming out to try and understand what might be going on. And actually, a lot of research has been accelerated through COVID because COVID also, you see these hyper-inflammatory responses, and that was what was killing people, is that the body would become, kind of go into a state of hyper-inflammation. And so, there might be further research that comes out now as a result of the focus that there has been on COVID over the last couple of years that might help some of these inflammatory disorders as well.
So I just want to ask about the fevers. Was that like every day, or would you, skip a day sometimes, or how was that?
Yeah, it was every day for 2 to 3 weeks until we started prednisone, which is a cortisol steroid. And what it is a really generalized way of trying to shut down the immune system and shut down inflammation. And then there's this emergence of new treatments called biologics, which are humanized proteins that can help block that cascade of inflammation through the body. And so without those, you'd be getting fevers every day while you're in that acute phase.
That's interesting because my doctor actually told me for Crohn's that some of the treatments, one of them was actually the prednisone as well. And he told me that there's like a lot of side effects that you could get because it's like a steroid that affects, like it's systemic. It affects like the whole body. And also mentioned the biologicals as well too. It's like a smart type of medication that focuses on like some area. For me, it's like the colon, right?
Okay.
So there is seemingly some overlap in the treatments.
Interesting.
Definitely. And I think, like you said, like with a lot of these treatments, in particular things like prednisone, they can be very effective, but they're also very potent, especially if people are on them for extended periods of time, because as you said, they're very generalized, they're systemic, and it's trying to work with your health practitioner to find that balance, right, of not being on too much, but not being on too little. And if you can spare them all together, then sometimes that's one of the best outcomes as well.
So this disease, does this manifest when you were getting into college? Was that around that time? How old were you when you first got it?
I was in my final year of university. So I was 22 when I was just turned 22 when I was first diagnosed. And I think with stills, there's no genetic predisposition, so there wasn't any family history of inflammatory disorders or stills, and so it came as a real shock. But that period is quite common. So there seems to be a bit of a range of like between 20 and 30 is when most people tend to develop stills. And then there's another bracket a little bit later in life. I think it's around 50 to 60. So there's these quite clear clustering of disease, first disease manifestation.
And this disease, since it doesn't have a cause, is known as idiopathic, that they call the medical term, idiopathic disease. I mean, do you think that there was any sort of event or just something in your life that you think might have been a catalyst maybe, or something that might have caused? Because sometimes we don't understand, like maybe just trauma or stressful events or something that can trigger, a disease that we think comes out of nowhere, but maybe it's just our body's response towards something that happened. Or was everything just normal in your life?
No, I think you are onto something around that. We'll never know the causation for sure, but definitely I think like at that point I was pretty stressed, obviously at university, and we had actually had I had a really difficult year prior where we actually lost my grandmother in our family home to a stroke. And I think that was a really, really difficult circumstance for me, because I was literally holding my grandmother during that event. And I think, like you said, I think that unresolved trauma or unresolved stress, like the body does try to process that. And whether it was a combination of these events, we're not sure. I had also been recently sick with a virus, like a month or two before I really got sick. And so you go, it might not have necessarily been one thing, but maybe a combination of all these things that are putting different stresses on the body, and then it just cascades, and that immune response cascades as a consequence of just being tested to the limits. But I guess at this point we don't know. But I guess with an educated guess, you would go, some of this stuff would probably have had some level of influence, at least in maybe making me more susceptible to what happened.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're onto something, because same for me. I know we're going back to my Crohn's, but exactly the same thing happened to me. I was going through university. I was studying engineering at the time. It was my second year, I believe, and the symptoms started right around then. I was getting like weird itching in my throat all the time. You could kind of hear it now a little bit. I'm always like, some weird itching and just other kinds of symptoms that kind of showed up.
Because Crohn's affects the
the
whole.
Crohn's affects like
from
pretty
top
much the
to
whole
bottom.
digestive tract, right? So I was just getting some really weird symptoms, but it was never like officially diagnosed until last year, when I actually had like the common symptoms, right? Like the kind of like the stomach pain and all that stuff. So for me it started during university, during a stressful time. Also, I think for a lot of people with illnesses, there's always that spark, something that triggers it.
I don't know whether it's the same. Like, you can kind of maybe tackle the problem from the other direction as well, of going, what are the things that help to reduce the symptoms? So like when you're less stressed, I'm less symptomatic. When I'm not overly tired, I'm less symptomatic. When I'm eating better, I'm less symptomatic. And it doesn't mean that these, like, you kind of have to look at, well, what are the things that also counter it? And maybe does that give us some evidence or insight into what may have also been contributing?
Yeah,
that's an interesting point. It's almost like when the disease is there, what counters it can show, what maybe caused it, if we're going against, the original
Yeah, that's interesting.
potential cause. So yeah. For in my mind, like I think like in medicine, sometimes we forget that the body isn't just this sort of organism that has these different organs that just work independently in a void and then cause havoc all of a sudden. There's so much more connected, and I think it's all the connectedness in the network in our body that we have trouble understanding and
Yeah.
how it all works together, and
Yeah,
that's
the
what's going
body
to take
keeps the
time.
score, right? I mean, like whatever kind of traumas. Like we spoke to like a therapist on this podcast a while back, and she was talking about how like these little T traumas. It doesn't have to be like this big T trauma that kind of leads
Yeah.
up to that causes the person to suffer. It could be all these little T traumas that accumulate over time, and over time, your body just kind of gives up at some point from the accumulation. So it's interesting, yeah. Can you tell us about, what was your lowest point in all this, in your fight with stills? Like, how did you overcome this? What were kind of the treatments you followed? Anything that really helped?
I think some of the darkest periods were, I think we can all kind of empathize to it to a point now, but like I went literally from working a part-time job, studying at university, sort of being able to go and play sport during the week and spend time with family. And in the space of 2 to 3 weeks, I went from a very normal life to complete isolation at home, unable to get out of my bed. And I think that was an experience that was very difficult to communicate to people prior to COVID, but I think we all have some level of understanding now of what it means to go from normalcy to abnormality in a very short period of time, and to be disconnected and shut off from our usual routines. And I tried to sort of try and remain as positive as I could during the experience of when I was first diagnosed. But one of the great challenges was that at that point when I was so sick, I had nothing to look forward to, and every single day was exactly the same. And I think that revealed to me how important hope is. And early on in my diagnosis, there was hope. There was hope that maybe the treatments were going to be effective, but after a few months, we realized that they weren't effective, and so I was dealing with not only the symptoms of my condition, but then also the side effects of my treatment. And we were very quickly running out of options. And it was probably 5 months in where I wasn't responding to treatment, and my stills was still in a very active state. And I'd lost a lot of hope. It was like, everything's not working. Is this going to be the rest of my life? I'm 22, and it's maybe a distorted viewpoint, but have I blown it? Like, what have I done? Like, where did I go wrong? And I think that's a really hard place to find yourself in, where it's like, at that point I was on low grade chemo, so I would feel rubbish for most of the week, and then you'd start to feel a little bit clearer. You'd have a bit more clarity, and then you would know on a Thursday night you have to do the chemo again, or the prednisone, or whatever treatment it ended up being. You're like, I know I'm going to go into 4 days and I am not going to be with it, and I'm going to come out of this and we're going to do it all over again. And for close to a year, I wasn't able to work. I wasn't able to study, and trying to find a light in that situation was tremendously difficult. It wasn't until I started the biologic, which for me was a monthly infusion at the hospital, of what they call an interleukin-6 inhibitor, tocilizumab, that things began to turn around, and I was able to go back to uni to do 1 unit. And I think for me, it was just to have something in the week. because up until that point, going to have my blood test was the only outing I might have in a week, and the only contact that I might have with somebody other than my parents. And my girlfriend would visit as much as she could, but she was also studying at that point, and I had friends who would try and make it over, but a week's a long time not to have a lot of interaction, and also to be going through an experience that a lot of maybe your family or friends don't fully understand. And at that point, I hadn't been able to make any connection with anybody else with stills. It was actually 5 years after my diagnosis that I actually even talked to somebody with stills. And so it was just this tremendous loneliness and this loss of hope that things weren't going to get better.
Oh, man.
So what is it about, having this support system about you that really brought you through all that you went through? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that I did quite early on in my diagnosis was I began to write, and I wrote a blog, and for me that gave me some meaning, but it also gave me some connection with other people. People would read the blog and sort of make comment, or and so this idea of trying to build community sort of started off in that original blog. And after I started the treatment, things began to improve a lot. I was able to sort of go out a little bit. Like I would come home and I'd be exhausted afterwards, maybe for days, but it was like kind of you quickly realize how important having some sense of community or connection is. And then like when I started the biologic, it was probably maybe 6 months or so after starting the biologic that everything began to settle down. And it was at that point that I sort of began to try and, I guess, rebuild my body. My body had been obliterated by this disease. And I needed to sort of start physical rehab I'd lost, I think, something like 10 kilos, and I didn't really have a lot of weight to lose. And so losing that amount of weight over the course of the condition meant I had a lot of muscle mass that I needed to build back up and get healthy again. And it wasn't until probably my second flare that I realized that it was really important to try and build something for the rare disease community, or to try and play a part in building community around that.
Interesting. Yeah. So we wanted to actually ask you, about your Running Rare foundation. So what is it about running that you're so drawn to, you think?
I think for me initially, when progress was so slow in my first stills episode, it can become really discouraging because you don't feel like you're making improvement. And the analogy that I can kind of think of is if maybe you develop a cold, you don't feel so good for a couple of days, maybe a week, and then you get better really quickly. And so each day you notice that you're feeling better. And often with these chronic conditions, it's like you need to expand that time frame from a week to maybe 6 months to see the same progress. And so you don't feel like you're making progress, but you are making progress. It's just at smaller increments. And so for me, running was a way that I could track my progress over time. So when I was really sick, like walking to the living room was a big thing. Like that was massive. And then a little bit later, it might be getting outside. That was big. Then it might be walking 100 meters. That was big. But those events happened over months. And so you don't appreciate, I've gone from bedbound to walking 100 meters. And then as my body began to settle down, it was like, maybe I might try and walk 500 meters. And then maybe I walk a kilometer. And then I ended up riding a lot. So because I was finding the impact on my joints because I'd lost a lot of muscle. Walking was really painful, but I could ride because it was lower impact, and so it might be going to try and ride a kilometer or 2 kilometers, and I tracked all this, and I began to see, hey, I'm making progress. It's slow, but I'm making progress. And that's kind of how I fell back into running. I'd always used running as kind of maybe a method of fitness, or trying to maybe regulate my emotions. So often when I was a bit younger, if I had complex or difficult emotions to try and process, I'd run. And so that was also hard when I first got sick, was that I used sport and exercise as a method of regulation, and all of a sudden I didn't have that coping mechanism anymore. But sort of going back to the running, it was sort of, it became a sport that I could do when I was well. So with organized sport, I couldn't do that because you had to be ready to perform at a particular time. And when you're living with a chronic disease, they don't always line up. Whereas running's a very accessible method of exercise. And so when I got sick the second time, this idea of, I'd gone to my specialist and she was like, due to the calcium leaching nature of prednisone, we need to get you moving again to build up your bone density so that you don't have issues like osteoporosis later on. And at that point, I was still really sick. And I was like, there's no way I can exercise. Like, if I go for a walk, like I'm dealing with fatigue for days, which means I can't think, which means I can't work. And so you end up in this really tough position where it's sort of like you need to move, but you can't pay the cost of moving. And I was just sort of talking to my wife about, like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how I'm going to rebuild from this. Like, my body's not tolerating exercise, but I need to move. And it was around a similar time to this that Australia got its first national kind of guidance for how to support the rare disease community. So it's called the National Strategic Action Plan for Rare Diseases. Prior to this, we didn't have any form of guidance or legislation to the government to know how to support the rare disease community. And so I was like, oh, I got to get moving. And this document's come out, and one of the key pillars of the document is awareness. And I was like, well, maybe I can put the two together. Maybe if I've got something that's kind of outside of me going, I've got a goal to try and support the rare disease community, maybe that will be enough of a motivation to go through that experience of rebuilding, which I didn't think I was going to be able to do. And so that's how sort of Running Rare came about, was this need to get moving, the release of the National Strategic Action Plan. And also it proved to be a catalyst that people would go, oh, why are you running? Yeah, I'm running to raise awareness for rare diseases. It's this natural conversation starter, whereas it's kind of disarming for people in some ways. And maybe they're willing to go into a deeper conversation because it seems like a juxtaposition, like someone with a rare disease running, people with rare diseases don't run. And so it grabs people's attention.
I like that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so your motivator was almost like you wanted to almost like prove a point that people that with rare diseases should be, able to run just as well almost as regular people.
Yeah, to a degree. And I think as well, I know that when I was first sick, like I'd spend time YouTubing like rare disease athletes or like Googling rare disease athletes. Nothing comes up. But ultimately, I think what I was trying to do was find a point of reference, find a beacon to go, getting better as possible. There's hope, because at that point I didn't have any. And so for me, like this kind of idea of running is going, hey, maybe there might be someone who will see my story and they'll go, hey, it's possible to get better. And and so it was kind of around that of kind of like, for me, there were beacons. There would be people that I'd found maybe with rheumatoid arthritis or lupus who were managing their condition and exercising. And so I grabbed onto them, and then I was like, hey, maybe I can leave a few sort of footprints behind me that people can go, hey, I got stills, and maybe there's a possibility that it can be overcome or at least managed. And yeah, to create the resources that I wish I had when I was first diagnosed.
So how many years now has it been that you're dealing with this disease?
It will be 8 years in February. So
8 years.
yeah, coming up
Okay.
in 8 years in February. And
Okay.
I've had kind of 2 major episodes during that period.
Okay. And so far, like right now, just, regarding your symptoms, is it under control? Like, how much do you feel on a daily basis?
Yeah, at the moment it's well managed. So I'm continuing the biologic, and that helps to just keep everything pretty settled. I think the major sort of symptom that I still experience is just chronic fatigue, and just yeah, having to be really mindful about how I use my energy, and as Evan was saying as well, making sure that I'm doing all those 1%ers that are going to give me the best chance of managing things. So sleeping well, eating well, regulating my stress in a healthy way, trying to move my body as well as much as I can. And that has probably changed from like when I was growing up. Exercise was all about like no pain, no gain, push as hard as you can, um, and your body would recover well. And now it's about making sure I don't go into those high heart rate zones, making sure I'm balanced, like making sure I'm not adding too much fatigue into the system. And just it's a completely different way of exercising, which I'm still learning.
Yeah, I could
Interesting.
totally relate to that. I mean, since like I compete in powerlifting, and I totally relate to that mentality. No pain, no gain, just going as hard as you can, lifting as hard as you can. And even just yesterday, I mean, like I have a home gym. I was lifting in my garage, and I was bench pressing, and I did an exercise. I did a weight that I probably shouldn't have done on my own, and I actually dropped the weight on myself by myself in the house. And it was so terrifying because it's like I had to roll the weight off myself, and like it literally like got stuck on my stomach where I have Crohn's, and it's like this is gonna make it worse. So it's like
Yeah.
honestly that was just stupid on my part. It was
Yeah,
totally
you
ego
just
lifting,
went
and
too
it's like
much.
you have to, like you said, you have to learn how to manage that, right? And just be more calculated, be more measured, especially when you have this kind of chronic disease. You don't want to mess yourself up more.
Yeah,
Go all out.
definitely.
Yeah. Because as much as exercise, is great, I think maybe sometimes people might go overboard, especially if they think like, they have a certain disease or chronic illness, or maybe just someone who is less motivated. It's like, okay, today I'm gonna work out, and they just go all in, and then they just burn themselves out, and too much exercise can then have its own effects. So
Totally. And I have kind of a story around that. So growing up, I played the sport that your country loves, ice hockey. And I my I when I got diagnosed, I never thought I'd be able to play again. And I started playing just in one of our local leagues last year. And what I found was like, obviously, hockey is 60 minutes minimum. It's a high intensity, pretty physical game. And I would just pay for that for the rest of the week. I'd be in fatigue debt the whole week. And it would mean that I wasn't able to really do much else. And then I'd sort of come good and I'm like, yeah, back to hockey this Sunday. And the cycle would sort of perpetuate. And what I found is like since hockey's finished up this season, like for me, it's going, all right, it's actually better for me just to go to the gym or do some exercise for 20 to 30 minutes because I can do that every single day. And I'm going to see a lot more improvement than busting myself once a week and paying a huge fatigue debt. And it's that shift of, in whether it's exercise or anything else in our life, often we put off doing what we perceive to be great, because maybe we don't have an hour to exercise, or we don't have an hour to study, or we don't have this or that. When if we just go, oh, well, how much time do I have available? Maybe I've got 20 minutes. Do that. So don't put off the 20 minutes just because you can't do the hour, or whatever it might be. And like often you'll get far better results just for doing something than not doing it. And it's not even that 20 minutes is like 20% of the hour. It's like you might get 60% of the benefit from just doing the 20 minutes. Like often it's not proportionate.
It's kind of that, what is that, the 80-20% rule of like 80% of the result comes from just doing the 20% of the work. Yeah, no, so true. I think, sometimes people just want to go all in, all out, do the full hour workout, 2-hour workout, or maybe they try to emulate certain, motivational speakers or athletes. There's so many people who really go hard, and, good for them, but it takes a lot of discipline and will to
especially with a chronic condition. You gotta be able to, modulate your training properly and just, measure it better.
Manage recovery.
Manage recovery that much more. I know in lifting there's something called RP, which is like rate of perceived exertion, right? So it's like you shouldn't like exert yourself to an RP like 10, which is like maximum exertion every single workout, right? You're gonna burn out. You might as well do like a lower RP, right? Like a 70, which is like basically 70%, and try to aim for that every time rather than doing 110% every session.
Because consistency is the key in all of this.
Yeah.
So we see that you love running, and would you say that running is kind of like a reflection of your life? How this running, it's not always easy, so it kind of sometimes has its ups and downs, and it can kind of emulate what we go through life. So would you say that it kind of reflects that, like the challenges that you have to get through? Because I think, you didn't start running because you ran 100 kilometers. What was it in
200 days?
200 days?
Yeah, so was
the
first chapter. And at that point, literally, I couldn't run around the block when I first started. And I just had this kind of audacious goal. I was like, Rare Diseases Day's coming up in 200 days. I'm going to try and run 100 kilometers. And it literally took me 150 days to run the first 50 kilometers. And every run was miserable. Like I was in so much pain. But I knew that there was going to be that tipping point. And it's like, if I keep pushing on this door, eventually the door's going to give. And I ended up running the last 50 kilometers in 50 days.
Wow.
And it was this kind of idea of like, I spent, 3/4 of the time getting to a point where I could double the distance in 1/4 of the time that it took me for the first 50. And so often in life, I think we can sometimes give up early because it's like not getting anywhere, and yet we don't quite reach that tipping point. And then the next year, running Rare had sort of gained a little bit of traction, and so I was like, all right, this year we'll try and do 150 kilometers in the same time period. And I was able to do it, and it's that kind of belief, right, of sticking at something, being consistent, and just showing up. And sometimes that's all we can do in life is just show up, keep showing up. And as you said, with life, like for me, running's kind of therapeutic in that we don't have a lot of things in our life where we can learn how to do difficult things or endure difficult things. And so for me, it's like running's practice for when my condition isn't easy. It's like, it's training. It's kind of, it's in some ways of, like if my disease is match day or game day, then the run is the practice leading up to, all right, I'm going to do something that's inconvenient. I'm going to do something that's a bit difficult. I'm going to do something where I'm going to have to process my emotions and pain, so that when it comes to game day, I've put in the work. And I know that sounds weird, but
No, I don't think it sounds weird. I don't know if you're familiar with David Goggins. He's one that runs like all the time. And actually, one thing he says that's kind of similar to what you just said is that he uses running as like a callus for his mind, for like when shit gets really hard, that like there's kind of like this protective layer from all the hard stuff he put himself through, that, you know, when he needs to pull that
Resilience.
out, he has that resilience. Yeah.
That's what he's
So I don't
building.
think that's weird at all. I think it's makes sense.
Yeah, man. I mean, you're teaching such great life lessons, just in general, you know. But besides, you know, just with rare diseases, but just, you know, in life, you know, just to show up, like you said, the consistently, and not giving up just because, you know, you're not seeing the results yet. That there's always that tipping point that we get closer as we keep showing up. So I think that's great. Yeah. What sort of advice would you have for people struggling with chronic illness? People, you know, because I have a friend of mine who has a really rare, also autoimmune disease. Hers, I think it's like 1 million or something. You know,
wow.
it's pretty rare, and it's something related to her blood cells. You know, at one point she had to have all her blood, you know, changed, like a completely different.
Like a blood transfusion.
Yeah, blood
kind of.
transfusion, yeah. And she has to take, like, I mean, you can't even count the amount of pills per day, treatments, constant, you know, it's been going on for, you know, more than 10 years now that she's been dealing with. But she does have this positive mindset of, you know, always just being positive and, you know, not really giving up. But I think some people might, and it might be tough for them, and they might not find the light, you know, so to speak. What would be your advice, you know, for people who just, because it can maybe lead them into depression, you know, and it's tough. Yeah,
definitely.
So,
And
yeah.
and the reality is, I think from one of the studies that I looked at, the likelihood of depression in someone living with chronic disease goes up something like 30 or 40%. And if you think of what people with a chronic disease are enduring on a day-to-day basis, it shouldn't be surprising to us. I think in terms of advice, I think there are a few things that I've found very beneficial. One is allowing yourself time to grieve, and allowing yourself to go through the process of grieving what you thought maybe things should have been like, and giving you space and time to do that. One thing that I found really beneficial just in the last 18 months, I began to go and see a health psychologist. And as we were sort of discussing before, my approach to, I guess, my recovery or my management of my condition has always been trying to understand my body as a system. And often when we go and see specialists, they'll look at one particular thing and kind of maybe look at it in somewhat isolation, and not be looking at, well, what are some of the other things that may be contributing to this. And so for me, one of the processes that we've been going through with my health psychologist is kind of understanding my nervous system. Often when we think of psychology, we think of the brain, the mind, how we process or make sense of the world around us, but we're neglecting that there are other parts of our body that are just as important to understand. So like the gut has its own nervous system, the heart has its own nervous system, the brain has, and one of these facts that really interested me was that the brain listens to every message that the heart sends to it, but the heart doesn't listen to every message that the brain sends to it. And so there's this kind of concept of looking sort of even at psychology just as how we think. But it's like, well, what's the state of the nervous system? How do we calm the nervous system down? What influence is that going to have on the brain? And for me, it was sort of beginning to unpack, like we were talking about, maybe some of those challenges or difficulties and traumas that I had growing up and beginning to deal with those. And that's been helping me sort of with managing my stills, which kind of seems like an odd direction to take. But when we start thinking about the body as a system, it goes, oh, well, that makes sense. If the nervous system's really agitated, there's going to be lots of other things that are agitated as well. I think other advice that I would give to anyone with a chronic condition or a rare disease is try and learn as much as you can about your condition. If you can't, find someone who can help you, because often you might only get 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes with a specialist a couple of times a year. But the decisions that are made during that appointment are going to affect 6 months of your life. And so be willing to advocate for yourself in those settings. It doesn't mean that you're rude or condescending, but try and gain understand like what it is that the specialist is trying to do. And I think as well, the final thing, and we've touched on it before, is like try and control the things that are in your control. So, for example, when my disease activity is really high and I'm not able to get out of home, I lose that cue to brush my teeth, which is kind of sounds like a silly thing, but often my cue for brushing my teeth is I've got to go to work or I'm going out, and I brush my teeth before I go out. And what I found is that when I was sick, it would get to 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon and my mouth would be feeling gross, and I'd realize, I haven't brushed my teeth today. But going, all right, that's something that I can control. I can learn a new cue for brushing my teeth. And that might be the only thing that I can control with my health at the moment, is whether my teeth are brushed or not. And so, it's finding, as we said, what's in my control, what's not out of my control, and let's take responsibility for the things that are in our control.
That's
great.
That's good advice, I think.
Yeah. So, do you have any insight on some research that's being done? I know you kind of mentioned that there's not too much going on right now, but is there any kind of research or development that's ongoing, to treat some of these illnesses?
Yeah, I think, and there's a number of things that are sort of coming out from my understanding of the current literature, and it mainly looks at trying to get biologic therapies introduced into the treatment plan a lot earlier. So here in Australia, we have kind of what they call like a fail first approach. So biologics are quite expensive, and so what they try and do is treat you with less expensive or less cost inhibitive treatments first. And then if you fail all of those, then you can start the biologic. And in the case of Still's disease, the research is saying, like, don't put them on prednisone or methotrexate. Like, try and put them on the biologic straight away as early as possible. And the outcome is that the likelihood of them going into remission and staying in remission goes way up. And so this is one of those challenges where there are treatments, or at least not necessarily cures, but treatments that are accessible, but because of how health systems are set up, sometimes people can't get onto the treatments that they need. And I know, like in the US, for example, where they have a more privatized system, people with Still's disease may never get the opportunity to go on a biologic because of maybe the particular insurance that they have. And I think that's really hard. It's like sometimes the treatment's there, but there are things that sit in between the individual and their opportunity to be able to get those. And I think we need to look at legislation around that and try and understand what are the barriers, because often these things are in place for a reason. It's not just that the government doesn't want to fork it out. They're trying to balance a number of competing issues. And so what we can do, though, is try and be proactive citizens, and to be polite, but also to let people know in the right format, say this is not working, and to bring people alongside. I think to be able to see these systemic changes. They don't happen by berating politicians or berating departments. They change through collaboration, and they change when we take the time to also listen to, well, what are they trying? What's the other person on the table trying to manage and balance as well? And
Yeah, just bringing more awareness in general also regarding these diseases.
So you mentioned like in terms of, like medical treatments, just like the biologics, right? Have you tried any other kind of, like natural, treatments or meditation or something like that to, relieve some of the symptoms?
Yeah. So as we spoke about, like, I think a big thing for me was sleep. And I was kind of looking at, all right, what are some of the things that I can be doing to help my sleep? So I ended up getting these like nose strips, which help just open up your airways. Again, it's like it might only make a small improvement, but you start adding a few of those things up, and you can start getting results. So for me, it was like also shifting my bedtime earlier. So for me, it was trying to give myself the best window of opportunity to get good sleep. And if I wake up a little bit earlier, that's fine. But sometimes my body's going to go, hey, I need that extra hour of sleep. I might need what I call super sleeps, which sometimes I might need 11 or 12 hours. But if I'm going to bed really late, I don't actually give my body the opportunity to kind of let me know how much sleep it needs. And so I went from waking up to an alarm at 7 o'clock, completely exhausted and fatigued, to now not waking up with an alarm, but I wake up at almost at the exact same time every day. So looking at my sleep hygiene, as I said before, reaching out and getting professional support with my mental health. That's played a big part in helping me to manage my conditions. I also do sauna and like cold water exposure immediately after to get that contrast. So the sauna kind of tends to help me with just releasing some endorphins, relaxing a bit. And then obviously the cold water, you get like the cold temperature shock proteins and all of that stuff, which like if you're just doing them in isolation, it's not going to make a difference. But as I said, if you start adding a few of these things up, they help. It might be looking at your gut biome. So like probably with Crohn's as well, it might be going, what are some things that my gut tends to settle down when I consume or don't consume? And they're maybe not going to cure you, but like a little bit better. And so for me, it was just a holistic approach, like breath work, sauntering, movement.
A lot of the things, a lot of the things you mentioned as well for me seem to work. Like I do like, cold water therapy, like cold showers. I do that. That seems to really help. Intermittent fasting for me, pushing my meals later in the day just to give kind of my digestive system a break, right? Other things you mentioned as well, like focusing, breathing, like your diet, the breathing as well, right? All those things seem to help. So I agree that like kind of like it's like a compound effect, right? Like the more you focus on these little things, the better the outcome is.
Yeah, and I kind of think about it in this way, like these are all like a lot of these things are things that we should all do, right? regardless of whether you have a chronic disease or not. A lot of these things will be beneficial. I think the difference is that with the person with the chronic disease, you can kind of think about, like, maybe if you're in good health, it's like walking down a highway, and if you get bumped sort of to the side, you've got a lot of buffer either way. For the people with the chronic disease, it's like living on the tightrope. And it's like you have no room, like you have less room, or your body is able to absorb less punishment, or kind of, and that's how I saw it. Like before I got sick, my body would recover. It would, before I got sick, like my body would kind of tolerate a lot more. And so I could kind of, you could recover better. And now it's like, got to get these things right, because if I don't, the impact's just a bit bigger.
Everything needs to be more dialed in.
Yeah. You have less room for error, basically.
Yeah, that's what it is. Interesting. Yeah. No, I mean, you're doing great, Tim. I think, everything that you're doing is to keep you on that tightrope, like you're trying to maximize and keep traction, because as soon as you start, doing less exercise, maybe, your sleep is not good, then that starts shifting your balance, and that's what we want to try to avoid, right? How would you say that you're trying to inspire change? I know you're doing the Running Rare thing to get people to talk about this. Is there anything else that you're doing to, the fight against rare diseases?
Yeah, so 10 years ago, a Rare Voices Australia formed, and they've sort of become the peak body for rare diseases here in Australia. And they do a lot of work in legislating to government, but then also supporting existing charities and research that's happening around rare diseases. And about 2 years ago, I came on board with them as an ambassador, and that's provided me opportunities to sort of attend and speak at conferences about my lived experience with a rare disease, and also meet with some of our federal ministers. And my mission, I think, in all of this, both Running Rare and my ambassadorship with Rare Voices Australia, is to rehumanise the conversation around rare diseases. So, for example, if I told you a story of an individual that was affected by a condition that affected 1 in 500,000 people, and it makes their life really challenging, we don't resonate that really with that. But if I go, Tim Fulton was 22 years old and he was diagnosed with a rare disease that changed his life forever. On a daily basis, he struggles with pain and fatigue, fevers and rashes. And he was an aspiring designer, but because of his condition, he's no longer able to work. And all he wants to do is to be able to use the experience and the gifts that he has to benefit his community. The second story is hopefully a little bit more compelling than the first. When we're dealing with big numbers, we don't know how to comprehend that. Like what does 1 in 500,000 mean? For me, it means statistically I'm the only one in my city with this condition. Or you might go, take the population of Montreal, divide it by 500,000, you go, oh, there might only be 10 people that are impacted by this condition. And so if we can rehumanize, if we can put a face to a name or face to a condition, then I believe that's where we can begin to inspire change, whether it's in our communities or in government legislation. But we need to rehumanize it, because as long as we're a statistic, very little is going to change.
That's so true, yeah. Get out of the numbers and put faces to these diseases so people can actually relate and be like, that could have been me, or that's someone, or I deal with something similar, so it's more relatable. And
people are always more interested in the story, right? Not just this fact or this number. Right? Like a story is always more compelling. It's more emotional. It makes people want to learn more about that person, for example, you, right, that dealt with this, and learning more about your story could say so much more than just reading out this number, like 1 in 500,000.
Yeah. No, exactly. So just before we ask our last question, I just wanted to ask. So regarding your graphic design, so are you doing that, or what are you involved in right now in your life?
Yeah, so at the moment I work for a boutique studio here in Canberra. And I've sort of found myself now more in web development and sort of managing a team of developers at our studio. And so I think for me, that's kind of a really interesting harmony of, I guess, logic and reason and rationale with code. And then there's also this level of sort of psychology and culture and in the design side and art. And I think for me that I find that intersection really interesting.
That's great, man. So yeah, so to wrap this up, one final question, bit of a deep philosophical one. So if, this is a bit of hypothetical, right? If you could snap your fingers one day, right, and make all diseases, really, so rare or not rare, disappear, but as a consequence, you would lose all the wisdom, resilience, friendships, and relationships that you've created past, the moment that you did get your own disease. Would you do it?
It's a really tough question because I think because it plays into a decision that not only affects myself but other people. I think for myself, I don't think that I would necessarily want to change the journey that I've been on. And I know that's something that surprises people, but I see the direction that I was heading in my life. I was very focused, but I was also incredibly unfulfilled. And I kind of think about how miserable I was, even though my life looked so put together and ordered before I got sick. Like I was doing well at school and I had a job in industry in my second year at uni, and I graduated at the top of the state. It was like, but it was never enough. It was like I'd get like a HD, and the first time that was kind of exciting, and then it was like, oh, I've got to get another HD, and then I'd get that HD, and it was like, oh, that's not enough anymore. Maybe I need a perfect assignment, and then I'd get a perfect assignment, and that wasn't enough, and then it was like, oh, maybe if I got a perfect unit, then that would be enough, and then I'd get a perfect unit or course, and it was like I was never fulfilled because I was trying to fill an identity and in a hole with all of these external things because I didn't want to deal with how I was feeling internally. And I think I was always I was always trying to fill that hole. And then I got sick, and it was kind of like, oh, all of these things that I was using as a facade of trying to not let anyone into how I was really feeling, or even myself into how I was really feeling, all of that got taken away. And it was like, oh, I really got to figure out who I am without these things. Who am I as not a great, or who am I not as a great student? Who am I not as an athlete? Who am I not as like some in my sort of social settings? And so for me, it was like this opportunity where everything got ripped away, and I had to decide how I was going to rebuild my own sense of identity. And so, and then I think as well, I became more empathetic. It opened my eyes to these challenges that in Australia, an estimated 2 million Australians live with a rare disease. If I had never had this experience, I would never have been aware of that. Something like 7 to 10% of Australia's population is impacted. And so going, all right, that's significant. And for me, it did completely reprioritize my direction. I used to be impatient. I had to achieve this or that, and I had to do it by X or Y. And now for me, I think I'm a lot more relaxed and I'm a lot happier. Even though I struggle on a day-to-day basis, that are these challenges, it's like, well, it's made me more community-minded than I was. It's helped me reprioritize the direction of my life. It's taught me that life is fragile and that I need to make the most of it, and that time is not guaranteed. And so, but I also know that that experience wouldn't necessarily be the same for everybody else. And so when you have this opportunity in our hypothetical setting to cure people of all diseases, it's like we're taking away a lot of pain and suffering, but is the alternative better? Are we more empathetic because we do have struggles in our community? Do we think of others because we can see people who are struggling and we can do something about it? And it's all those interesting things of like when you begin to get into the philosophical and the hypothetical of we change one cog, but what else in the system does it change? Do we become more selfish? Do we become, I don't know, I don't know. I think sometimes we need that balance right in life. And I think one of the things that I think I'm learning is that we we chase comfort when maybe we shouldn't. We we and so much of our lifestyle is around making things easier or more convenient, but some often the growth is found in the discomfort and in the challenging. And maybe we need to be more as a society teaching people the tools to be able to deal with the discomfort and the challenge, and would be better off for it.
Yeah.
Fantastic answer.
Yeah. So all that to say, like, there's always going to be some good, right, that results from that. Like,
Yeah.
from any, challenge in life, there's going to be a positive somewhere, right? Like you said, you wouldn't even change necessarily the outcome of how your life went about, right? Like with your disease and all that, because, that kind of paved the way for other, positive things in your life. So that's interesting.
Yeah. No, I think what you also said there, how your disease stripped away a lot of what you had, so it kind of forced you to go into finding what your essence was about. What did you value most as a person? Because sometimes we can get bogged down and our vision fogged with success and money, and I got a house, a car, I got this and that, I got a relationship, or a bunch of materialistic things. But then who are you once all of that is taken away? What is your person actually about? And yeah, sometimes when you get hit hard and you fall to maybe rock bottom, that's when you're like, well, what am I about?
Yeah.
What is my essence?
It's a wake-up call, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So yeah. Well, I don't know if you had anything else to add.
No, I think
Tim?
that great. Yeah.
Tim, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, just really appreciate the opportunity, and I really enjoyed sort of thinking about some of these questions, and I know I'll probably ponder them after this as
That's
well.
great,
But
yeah.
I think I love connecting with people like yourselves who, a testament of that idea of having something in your mind and then figuring out how to make it a reality. And I know that I found that really inspiring, because you guys are at over 60 podcasts episodes now?
65, I think.
At the moment, yeah, 65.
Unreal.
Yeah.
We're keeping it rolling.
We're also trying to keep consistently show up, even though growth can be hard sometimes.
Mhm.
But like you said, one day it might be a tipping point, and
yeah. So Tim, why don't you go ahead and tell everyone where they could find you, where they could find your Running Rare Foundation, all that good stuff.
Yeah. So to find out more about, I guess, the Running Rare project, you can visit runningrare.com. We've also got an Instagram, Running Rare. And this year as well, we've also set up a dedicated fund within Hands Across Canberra, which is our community foundation here in Canberra to support the rare disease community. So there's some links on the Running Rare website if you want to look at how you might be able to support. Charity's doing incredible work.
That's great. Thank you very much, Tim. It was a pleasure to speak to you.
Thanks for coming on, Tim. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. And look forward to seeing how this all unfolds.